Good evening, folks, and welcome to the next edition of the CACPD series. We'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight, taking the time out of your evening to take part in this session. We'd like to take a minute to acknowledge the tragedy that occurred yesterday. Our thoughts are with those who were involved and their families. If you or anyone you know is affected by this, we have a list of resources available on the mental health page on our website. Members also have access to the Canadian Mountain Community Critical Incident Stress Management Program. Information on this program and our website link will be dropped in the chat box for you folks to access. We would also like to acknowledge that tonight's session is being hosted in the territory of 4 nations, the Siniks, the Secwepemc, the Ktunaxa, and the Silks. So tonight's session, gym conditioning for safely navigating skis, snowboards, and desks. Physiotherapists Fraser Sprigings and Shota Ida are going to provide foundational principles and techniques of lifting weights to avoid injury, provide longevity in the avalanche industry, and improve one's quality of life. Fraser and Shota are physiotherapists from Keystone Health, located in Revelstoke, BC. Shota has a Master's of Science degree in physiotherapy and a Bachelor of Science in kinesiology. Prior to being a physiotherapist, he worked as a kinesiologist and personal trainer, designing and showing clients how to execute training programs to reach their goals. Fraser has been working with and providing physiotherapy for members of CA for over 20 years. Prior to moving to Revelstoke, Fraser worked at the Banff Sports Medicine Clinic, which specializes in knee, shoulder surgeries and routinely sees 40% of its surgeries resulting from ski and snowboard injuries. They're helping people understand and execute strength and conditioning programs as a foundational principle of Shota and Fraser's treatment approach at Keystone Health, which they will be sharing in this presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Fraser and Shota. Actually, just before that, I should get into a little bit of housekeeping. My apologies. If you folks have a question, please raise your hand during the presentation. You can ask that question. We'll draw you from the audience. Good verbal questions are the best way we can understand what you're asking. You can also drop them in the chat box and we'll try and tease those out. Try and do them when they're associated in the presentation. And then we have a bit of a PowerPoint happening tonight, as well as some demonstrations of some exercises to be done. And we'll take some breaks in between the exercises so you can ask questions with regards to those. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Fraser and Shota.
Hello, and thank you much for having us tonight. I'm the Fraser, and this is the Shota. And we've got a bit of a PowerPoint presentation to share with you, just talking about the foundations of why we'd want to lift heavy is essentially the concept of a gym-based program that we're talking about, as to how and why. And then we'll get into some sort of the complicated movements you can do at the gym that require a little more technical knowledge. So about 20 minutes of a presentation, and then 40 minutes of us talking about exercises specifically. But this program that we're providing here is for you. So if you have any questions, please, ask them and we'll address them accordingly. So I'm just going to share a PowerPoint presentation we've got.
Looks good, Fraser.
Perfect, thank you. So we wanted to discuss this sort of thinking about skiing and snowboarding, but also what we're calling desks, just being respectful of a lot of time is spent either traveling by vehicle or forecasting with desks, and more computer work is happening within the industry through that. So a question we hear a lot is, my job is quite physical. Why do I need to go to a gym afterwards? Isn't it physical enough? And there are physical aspects of the industry for sure, but then also say driving, transporting to remote sites or working at an office setting can be relatively sedentary. And the big thing is if you've done something long enough, your body will accommodate to it and it won't make any gains or improvements on it. So skiing to ski more to get stronger isn't a correct approach. So what we're looking at with the gym, or what I'll say is lifting heavy, is to create a stimulus that's higher than what you'd normally be subjecting to your body to make gains. So on this graph, this yellow dotted line is sort of at any time along time here, that's the minimum amount of stress and strain or lifting heavy that your body needs to make physiological adaptations. And if we're not going, say, to a gym or doing some physical activity outside of the gym that's higher than this component here, we'll just continue going statically straight across here and not making gains. And if our body's subjected to something like this, where it's a higher stress than what we can safely accommodate, we are going to experience pain and strain. So the goal is to improve what maximum capacity we can take as far as stress. And if we're able to do some exercises within this sweet spot zone of it's challenging but not breaking me, this stress curve will rise and we'll be able to, two things, be subjected to a harder stress without injury happening. And we will also have to make improvements, lift something heavier or be stronger, more robust to continue making gains. So if we just ski the whole season as an example, we would just stay here. And it's not till we add higher stresses or different stresses to our body that we'll see gains being made. So there's a short-term and a long-term goal with lifting heavy, going to a gym. And one is to avoid serious injury that can happen sort of in your immediate life. The other key one, though, is improving your quality of life when you're young, say 20s, 30s, and 40s. So that when you're in your 90s or your first century, you still have a high quality of life with your health being as optimal as possible. So what I mean by that is this is a graph showing like if we are applying those loads and stimuluses as lifting heavy early in our life, and to give more numbers to that, I'm saying in your 20s, early 30s, about 25 is the average peak power that someone has, and then as we get older, we start losing our power. Cardiovascularly, however, your cardio or your endurance, it's more into, say, your late 40s that it's optimal. 30 to 40, it's pretty good. And then everyone inevitably will have a slow decline. And in this example, we want to be on this line of the decline. We don't want to be down here with a steeper line of decline and entering into a threshold here where we're not able to look after ourselves when we're older. It's higher risk of us slipping and falling on ice and having something bad happen to us, like a broken hip. But if we're able to take care of ourselves here and sort of get that heavy load and resistance, we're increasing our muscle mass and strength, which will, in the example of slipping and falling on ice, maybe give you enough strength to avoid that slip and fall when we're elderly. It also just gives your bones more padding that if you do land on your hip, you're not going to break that hip. It's improving your bone density, which if the bones are denser, you're less likely to have fractures or osteoporosis where you're highly susceptible to fractures happening. We can improve your mobility by doing larger movements than you would be doing in your day-to-day life, improving your agility by doing quick and fast movements so you have faster, quicker reflexes. And a key pillar for mental health is physical activity to help with that. I should point out, it's not just here within our 20s, 30s that it's critical. If you were on this decline and you do start lifting heavy, doing gym exercises as an example, you can correct this curvature and start bending the line and even starting to make gains as well. through there. So you're never too old or young to start going to the gym and lifting heavy. So how many reps should I do? How hard should I go? What is heavy? Are common questions. And I don't want to bore you with too much wordage and literature. So we've only got one citation in this entire presentation, and it's just around bone density, that they have found high load and low reps is great for improving our bone density. What they have found is if you're doing, say, endurance running, where it's heavy repetitions on your legs, like pounding on the concrete, the cells that get stimulated to improve bone density, they get desensitized. And after, let's say, 20 steps of pounding, they've sort of shut off and they're not being stimulated to create higher bone density. So endurance sports, although they are healthy and good for a number of things, they aren't sort of the best bang for your buck for improving bone density. It's more that heavy lifting. And we'll talk a bit about how do you get 80% of your one repetition max. That's medical terminology or research terminology, just saying they've taken someone and had them, say we're doing bench press, stack as much weight on the bar as they can do just one repetition. They successfully do it, but they definitely can't two. That'd be 100% of your one repetition max. And then you can calculate a percentage of that, which here they're saying 80 to 25% of that weight is what you'd want for there. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you need to figure out your one repetition max and do the math on it. We'll talk about some easier, more field-ready ways to talk about that in the next slide. Generally speaking, we talk about how many reps we would like people to do. 3 to 7 reps is great for power. 10 reps is great for strength. And just to help differentiate what the difference between power and strength is, say in that example of bench press, if 2 people are lifting 40 pounds and they both successfully lift that weight and put it down, you can say they're both equally strong or strength. But if one does it faster than the other, you'd say that person is more powerful. So there's usually a time unit of getting mass from A to B to talk about power. And some sports or activities require definitely a time component. So we can say we're training for power. Sometimes you just got to be strong and get the job done. No one's got to stop watch to make sure you're doing it fast. And that's where 10 reps seems to be a pretty ideal sweet spot between power and the other side of the spectrum, which is endurance. And commonly we'll recommend 15 reps to improve someone's endurance or the ability to repeatedly do the same load again and again. However, kind of similar to bones, as for bone density, if you're going higher than 15 repetitions, it's not hard enough for the muscles to detect that they need to improve upon getting their hypertrophy or strength or getting physiologically stimulated to work on that endurance. So commonly it's somewhere between 3 and 7 reps for power, 10 is a nice round number for strength, and about 15 reps is great if you're working towards endurance. And this is the next slide where we talk about how hard should each rep be. And commonly I'll recommend, say you're doing 3 sets of 10, is you want the last 2 reps to feel hard. This is a scale someone has written up just to sort of try to quantify that with numbers and sort of what they call it rate of perceived exertion is. And rate of perceived exertion has been studied a lot in physiology research, sort of looking to someone giving a number of how hard it is and then measuring their body as far as power output or VO2 max, which is a measure of efficiency of consuming oxygen for endurance. And there's a great correlation between extremely expensive lab devices to quantify these numbers to someone just giving a number 1 through 10 on how hard it feels. So it seems like our brain's quite well wired accurately to our body to regulate how hard it is. So in this example of 10 is the hardest thing of I've ever done, I'd be looking at sort of a 8.5 out of 9 as far as how hard it feels to help quantify that. Commonly, we'll recommend 3 times a week training to make physiological gains. So getting faster, higher, stronger. If you're doing it twice a week, you're probably maintaining what you have going on. And if you're only able to do it 1 time a week, perhaps with the exception of mental health, it's not going to help sort of with progressions. And I commonly tell people just try to get caught up on life and try to get 2 or 3 sessions in the following week. And why would we only do 3 sessions? Why wouldn't we just train every day? And this is sort of showing the effects of overtraining, where this is the person's performance level, and then they go to the gym, and right after the workout, they're definitely not stronger than they were before, because they've just beat up their muscles. And microscopically, we've actually caused small tears in the muscle or even the bone at a microscopic level. And then our body repairs if in the recovery phase or if we're getting sufficient sleep, and we'll make these gains. However, in this example, the person's run back to the gym and trained again before this this curve is reached above that threshold where they were, and continuing down here by overtraining. This would be an example of someone who has timed it correctly and listen to their body, or nowadays too, you can use a lot of smart watches and smartphones to check like your heart rate and see how it is, and know what your resting heart rate is. And if you wake up the next morning and your heart rate's much higher than it on average is for sleeping, you may be overtraining. But here the person's worked out, they've had a really hard workout, and then they've allowed sufficient recovery time. They're starting here. But now their body, and this kind of translates back to that first slide, needs an even higher stress to physiologically make those gains. And here they are working out again, gets knocked down. And then this would just continue going, sort of a porpoising, slowly trending upward effect. And a lot of times working with athletes and organizations, it's really trying to time this sweet spot of when have I made a recovery and I can train immediately again. Some people can, shorten up those windows and maybe get 4 workouts a week. Some people, they need a little extra recovery time, and it's only 2 times a week that they're able to do that. But if I'm talking in broad strokes, it'd be about 3 times a week is a good place to start. And then just listening to your body and recording your rep sets and weights and how you're feeling is a great way to help moderate. Will my next workout be harder? Will it be lighter? Will I need more duration of time between? Or start working on my sleep quality just to get the better quality as far as performance in a gym or out in the field doing what you need to do. That concludes the boring part of PowerPoint. Are there any questions regarding that part? And then the next part of the session is talking about specific exercises.
Apparently I have no questions from the floor there, Sprigings. Sorry.
They're super boring or just nailing it. It's one side of the spectrum.
I think you're getting all the details in.
Okay. You have questions? I'm gonna stop sharing the screen here, and gonna pass it over to Shota. Just move to full screen here. Be great to see ourselves though. Sufficient to yeah.
Okay, so
sorry folks, just before we get started there, Shota, we do have one question from Sue Gold. You can go ahead there, Sue. I think I gave you a prompt to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. So that's all awesome information, and it's kind of along the lines of what my daughter's been teaching me, so it's great. But I have a question about the amount of times at the gym per week, and I I tend to go more like 4 or 5, but I'm alternating like a push, pull, quads, hamstring, like I'm alternating day to day. So if I worked quads one day and then I go the next day and do an arm pull kind of workout, is that going to give my quads enough break to, I'm not going to hit quads again for another 4 days sort of thing. So I'm hitting it way more than 3 times a week.
Yeah. I'll let Shota weigh on this as well, but I feel you're quite fine doing that. So let's say specifically the muscle fibers of your quads, they're not getting microscopically torn and irritated. They've got those 4 days to work on recovery there. The only caveat to that is like the other, I'll call them energy systems or the bigger part of your body, like say your nervous system that is going super hard to do these like heavy squats, and then the next day you're doing really high repetition or sort of straining in more of a push or a pull.
Yep.
Has your nervous system recovered from that? And by that I mean, can you say both mentally and neurologically, like can you go hard and get that maximum recruitment in say the push on day 2? And if you are, both part of that is motivation, but then part of that too is just checking with yourself and how much other stress are you accumulating throughout the day. It might be fine. It might be, there's good stress and there's negative stress. That those be just things to keep in the back of your mind, that although say you haven't worked your legs for 4 days, but you've been going hard or not getting that sleep quality, you may have to change your configuration. But I think we definitely hear people doing like leg day, more push pull now is the trend versus like arms, core.
Right.
But from a muscle perspective, I think totally fine. And then it'd be, in my mind, thinking just checking with your nervous system. So that also be too, like, am I getting a lot of colds, sick, worn down? If no, I'd be like, yeah, keep going with that recipe. And what you should see like as a metric is just you're able to make gains in those exercises by it feeling easier, heavier like reps or weight that you're able to do under load, or your technique is just looking much smoother, more confident with it. If that's not happening, you may want to add a little more time in between. A good colleague of mine in Saskatchewan, when he's checking in with athletes, he's like, do you feel good? Do you feel bad? Do you feel something in between those fingers there? As a quick check-in to see how people are doing. And then they grade what that workout's going to be for the next one off of that and scale it down, scale it up. Or if they get the middle finger there, it's maybe we just cancel today or work on something else, as a bigger picture.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And I wondered about the nervous system part of it, because there are definitely days where my energy is super low, but I go anyway. So just a bigger picture, I'm almost 60 and I got knee injuries and I'm trying to stay ahead of the game. And I wonder sometimes if I'm overtraining. I definitely have had some gains, but my knees have shut me down lately in a big way. So I'm having a hard time with leg stuff, but whatever. That's beyond the scope of this thing. That helps me just to hear what you had to say about the nervous system, and I can check in more with that. Great.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, exactly what Fraser is kind of saying. But the nervous system piece is definitely crucial. I would say you see a lot of times in training programs that, athletes perform, there's kind of like a certain, it's called periodization. So there's a block of exercises where maybe you're focusing on the power or strength or endurance or something like that. And then usually that's followed with a bit of like a deload week, meaning maybe you're not in the gym going at that like 75, 80, 85% level. And maybe you're dropping it back to like a 50 or 60%. So you're still performing the movements, maybe working on technique, but not taxing the nervous system quite as much. And you see that quite often in training programs where there will be a week after you finish, say 3 or 4 weeks of pretty hard training, where you have 1 week where you're just kind of resetting, letting the body kind of recover, and then a lot of people will find significant kind of strength gains just by having that week of a bit lighter workload.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, and I can probably speak for a lot of us in the industry, we'll go at the gym for a couple of weeks and then we go away to work. And like, I've just come off an Avalanche course and I freaking couldn't hardly do anything at the gym anymore. It was like, really? In 1 week, I've lost so much. It's crazy. So it'd be really great if you could speak a bit to that tonight at some point, just how to maintain periods when you can't actually get to the gym.
For sure.
If my short-term memories forgets, please
Yes.
bring it up, because that is a very critical piece. And I think we've got, about 6 complicated exercises, just compound movements. There's lots of moving on. So we'll talk about the sort of some cues to think about it. And I mean, they all improve muscle, but let's talk a bit about mobility and bone density through there. And then maybe we can tie it all together to a bigger picture of periodization, which Shota was talking about. And yeah, I'd like to thank anyone showing up tonight for this presentation. It's the middle of winter and it's a mean, lean snowpack. So glad you've got some extra capacity to take this in. But let's talk about a bigger picture of, those seasonal variances. And when you come after a course and you're like, I'm exhausted, but I want to do something, how can I get value long-term for my body?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other, that was a great string of questions. Are there any other questions regarding the awesome slide presentation?
No, looks like you're good to go for the next section.
One works. Okay, thanks. I'm going to pass it over to Shota, but I'm going to be the middle-aged man who's got a very stiff back and hips and ankles trying to do squats. So for myself, I'm using this a lot right now as a mobility drill. Over strength specifically, but I'll let Shota talk about some of the nuances of squatting right now.
All right. So yeah, we have 6 exercises tonight. They're all what we consider compound exercises. So a compound exercise is basically an exercise that uses multiple muscle groups to perform the action. So we're going to start with the squat. So we have 2 variations of the squat. First one we're going to go through is the back squat. So for the back squat, your setup is going to be feet are going to be about shoulder width apart, and you want to be kind of nice and centered in the bar with a nice grip. I would say maybe just wider than shoulder width apart. The main points with the squats is going to be starting with the movement with the hips. So what I mean by this is I often see a lot of people starting the movements with the knees. So they coming down, breaking at the knees first before the hips. And what we're trying to focus on is trying to kind of break the hips first. Not saying that breaking at the knees is bad, but just in general, day-to-day function when you're training and working out, it's a bit more, you recruit larger muscle groups when we start at the hips rather than just starting with the quads. So we're going to be focusing on basically if someone karate chop your hips, you're going to stick your butt back first as if you're going to sit in a chair, and then we're going to then initiate with the knees coming down into a bit of a squat there. And then once you hit about 90 degrees, you're going to come back up, nice, slow, and controlled. And all throughout this movement, you're going to be working on keeping your core engaged. So everybody kind of is, I feel like most people are aware, like, you don't want to be rounding your back a whole bunch when you're squatting. But the opposite is also true. You don't want to be overarching. So what we want to ensure is just a nice neutral spine. And that also goes for the neck as well. So as you come down, I tend to tell people try and pick a point on the floor to focus on so that you're not, I mean, maybe for the first couple, you want to look at yourself in the mirror, make sure your technique is right. But after you kind of have the technique, try and pick a point so your neck stays nice and neutral. So as you come down, Fraser's looking at the ground, nice and neutral spine, and then coming back up, nice, slow, and controlled. And also the other point, which might be hard to see from this angle, is as you're coming down, you're trying to keep your knees over your toes, so you're not letting them come in. So That would be the endpoint that might be hard to see from this angle. And with all the exercises that we're going to do today, just making sure breathing is happening is important. I know it seems self-explanatory, but a lot of people tend to hold their breath. So generally, you want to be breathing out on the difficult portion of the motion. So in this exercise, as Fraser comes down, he's breathing in. And then as Fraser is coming up, he's breathing out, and you're getting kind of that power as you so that's going to be the back squat. And then, so we'll get Fraser to re-wrap the bar. Next, we're going to be going through the front squat. So with the front squat, it's very similar in terms of body mechanics, except you're going to be holding the bar up in front of you. So what this is focusing on is you're challenging since the load is in front of you, you're challenging your back extensions a little bit more, which for, this industry, wearing a backpack lots in the field, that sort of thing, tend to put you into a hunched forward position. So we want to kind of break out of that by strengthening some of the back muscles. So that's why a variation of back squats and front squats are probably going to be a good idea. Front squats can be a bit challenging if you don't have good shoulder mobility. So it requires your elbows to be quite high. And Fraser is kind of hooking the bar with his first two fingers and getting that bar nice and close to that collarbone. If this is too challenging for some people, you can also do the alternative, which is, and I can zoom in a little bit more here, which is just crossing your arms across and having the bar resting on the front of the shoulders. So either works. And so, those are two alternatives for bar positioning. As for the actual movement, it's going to be very similar to the back squat. So again, Fraser breaking at the hips, keeping that spine nice and neutral, coming down into a squat to about 90 degrees or slightly lower, and then coming back up. Again, breathing out on the up and breathing in on the down. So let's see a couple of those right here. Excellent. Good. So squats also a great exercise for mobility. So in general, unless you're strength training, don't tend to get that deep into the squat position. We tend to, if we're sitting at the desk, kind of be in that semi-squat position, but not quite that deep. So just by loading into those deeper positions, we can help improve hip mobility, shoulder mobility, and back mobility. So that is the back and the front squat. Any questions with those?
No questions so far, guys.
Okay, perfect. And then I guess just while we're on the squat, I think this one applies pretty good. The tempo and speed of movement can really make an exercise quite a bit harder or quite a bit easier. And it's a very easy way to modify your strength and conditioning program. So what I mean by that is basically if you were doing the squat and it's feeling pretty easy and you want to kind of switch it up a little bit, just by working what we call an eccentric movement. So Fraser is actually back over here. So focusing on maybe a 3 to 4 seconds down rather than kind of 1-to-1 ratio. So working slow, controlling that movement, and then kind of a bit more explosive back up. You can train those different styles of training that Fraser was talking about. So that quick explode up from the bottom is going to work on building more of that power. So you're trying to build that force as fast as you can, right? And that's where that time component comes into it. And then also for the slow down, for skiing in general, skiing typically is an eccentric move or sport. So we're trying to a lot of the time absorb those impacts, and you're trying to kind of absorb everything. So that's why we're kind of training with a different approach to maybe the speed, so that slow lower can be also helpful for improving the body's ability to handle longer ski days. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the step up next. So I'm just gonna wheel. Yeah. Yeah. So for this exercise, we're going to be doing a step up. So this one's a great one to work on improving hip mobility. You can do this on weighted or with body weight. It doesn't have to be a barbell, so you can use dumbbells or a kettlebell or something like that as well. But basically for this exercise, you're going to have a box. I usually say no higher than a 90-degree bend in the hip. Otherwise that is a bit too high. So find something that's about that size. And then basically the main points for this one is you're going to be really working on trying to keep a nice solid foundation. So a lot of times I'll see kind of people trying to use their back muscles to try and hike the hip up to get that hip nice and high. So that's where we want to focus on. Core stays nice and stable. And then you're going to be moving your leg up onto the step. So Fraser's going to take a step up. And then making sure that you're transferring your weight onto the front foot before stepping up. So you're not trying to slingshot yourself up with your back foot. And then back down, nice and slow. Just like so. Same goes with the knee positioning. I know you guys probably can't see it from here, but making sure that the knees aren't, or making sure that the knees are staying over the top of the foot and not collapsing. So Fraser's going to do maybe a couple more. Oh, yeah. So yeah, the knee positioning, not collapsing in, nice and strong. And you can also see Fraser making sure that his hip isn't kicking out as he goes and steps up. Just like so. So with this one, I usually recommend people start with a lighter weight, make sure your technique is good, and just all these exercises in general, make sure your technique is good before just going to straight to heavy weight. But this exercise is excellent for, I mean, in the field, walking in deep snow, being that sort of thing, having to, get those hips nice and high, and really practicing on using the proper muscles to do that without cheating heavy up the hip. So that is the step up. Any questions with the step up?
No questions from the floor there, guys.
All right. So the next movement we're going to be doing is a deadlift. So the deadlift is a super functional movement and is also a compound exercise. So it uses multiple muscle groups to perform this movement. So the deadlift is, something you do every day. If you need to pick up something off the ground, that sort of thing, you're going to be trying to, basically the idea of incorporating the deadlift into your training is so that it becomes almost like an automatic movement. So when you go to pick up something off the ground, you kind of just use a deadlift type technique to pick up that object. It'll save your back because you're using more muscles than just bending forward from the waist trying to pick up something, right? So you're using your hips, so the butt muscles, your quads, hamstrings, core, everything is engaged in the deadlift, which is why we really want to add this one into the group. So for the setup, so there's a couple different ways to set up the deadlift. We'll just go through kind of the shoulder width stance. You can do a wide stance as well, which tends to target your butt a little bit more. But for today, we're going to just show kind of shoulder width. So what Fraser is going to do to set up is he's going to have his feet a little bit shoulder width apart. and his arms are going to be on the outside of your legs. So you can get nice and close to the bar. So rolling the bar close to the shins. And then this is where the important part happens, where you really want to get your hips as low as you can before performing this movement. So get the hips down nice and low, and then keeping the bar as close to the shins as possible. Fraser's gonna think about squeezing kind of the shoulders back, so you're not rounding through the upper back. And he's gonna take up some of the tension in the bar and then lift using your butt and hips. So hips are gonna go towards the bar and then back down in the opposite movement. Good. So deadlift is not a low back exercise. Some people I've heard say it's like, oh, a low back exercise. It's more, I would say, a hip exercise in which your low back and your core are being utilized to keep your spine nice and neutral. So again, really want a neutral spine with this exercise, not overarching or overextending, overextending or flexing. So again, it's just nice and neutral, coming up, bringing the hips to the bar, and then coming back down. Same goes for knee positioning for this one. It might be a bit tough to see here, but you maybe look from back there. So the knees, again, are staying over the feet, not collapsing inwards as Fraser lifts the bar. Just like so. Any questions with the deadlift?
No questions again, guys. Looks like you're covering it quite well.
Okay. And so the next exercise we're going to do is called a Romanian deadlift. So it is similar in terms of the movement you're performing, but it is going to be challenging a different set of muscle groups slightly. So this exercise is going to focus on your hamstring muscle groups a little bit more. So that's the muscles kind of at the back of the leg here, which are definitely very important muscles in terms of skiing. Can be a bit more of like a quad. So the front of the leg dominant sport. So it's important to have equal strength when it comes to your legs. You want to have kind of equal front of the muscles to the strength of the muscles in the back of the leg. It's going to help prevent injury. So for this exercise, the setup is going to be essentially the same. So feet about shoulder width apart and grabbing the bar kind of just outside there. The difference here is going to be, actually maybe I'm going to move the camera back to the side. So the difference here is going to be, Fraser's going to pick the bar up, and you can kind of use a deadlift type technique to get the bar up. And then once you're up top, we're going to kind of switch it up by, we're going to break at the hips, keep your trunk nice and neutral. So using your core muscles, your back muscles, those are going to help keep your spine neutral. And we're going to do almost like a little waiter's bow. So you're going to stick your butt back, slight bend in the knees, until you feel a bit of a pull in through the hamstrings. And then once you feel a bit of that pull, you're going to come back up, try to use your hamstrings and your butt. Again, this is not a low back exercise. So we're really focusing on trying to pull using the butt muscles and the hamstrings. So just like so, you can practice this movement as Fraser is doing with just a broom or a dowel. And sometimes if you're having trouble doing the hip hinge portion of it, you can just put yourself close to a wall, and then you're basically just trying to touch your butt to the wall. And that can be a nice way to help work on technique as well. Yeah, I would say Knee positioning again stays over the foot, and then just really making sure that you're keeping your core engaged. I would say this exercise is a bit easier to start having a bit too much arch and extension, so kind of arching back. So just really make sure that that is a nice neutral spine. You should be feeling this one working the muscles in the back of the legs. Any questions with that one?
Nope, good to go.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we're in lower. Okay, so this next exercise is called a Turkish get up. So this exercise again is a compound exercise. It uses multiple muscle groups. So everything from the shoulder to the core to the hips, to the muscles around the knee. So Fraser's you're gonna start by lying on the floor with with a kettlebell. If you feel comfortable with this exercise, it is a bit more challenging. So if you want to start just by doing body weight, just by having one hand up, that's fine too. But you're going to have lying on your back. So Fraser is lying on your back. You're going to grab that kettlebell and we're going to have one hand up, and the same knee as the weight is in the hand is going to be in a kind of a bent position. Then what Fraser is going to do is you can have your, you can't really see here. Oh yeah. You can have your opposite hand out nice and straight to help assist with the movement. But Fraser's going to push the weight up towards the sky. Think about trying to contract your core, flex the abs to push the weight up. Weight is always going to be right above you. So Fraser's pushing it up. And then at this moment, he's going to push this knee and bring his hips kind of into like a tabletop position. And then from this position, he's going to move his other leg underneath into a kneeling position while keeping that weight over top. And then he's going to straighten himself out, so bringing his torso up. And then now you're in a half kneel position with the weight overhead. And then from here, you can push through that front leg, kind of transfer your weight onto the front leg, and then stand up nice and tall, keeping that weight overhead. Then once you get to this movement, you can reverse it. So Fraser's going to go back into a half kneel position. He's going to put his hand down, kick his left leg forward, and then come back into that lying position. Nice, slow and controlled. So a bit more of a challenging exercise, but it is a really great one for shoulder stability and getting that whole body working rather than just the legs. So maybe we'll do another demo here. So Fraser's got the weight above him, pushing up towards the sky, kick the leg underneath into the half kneel position, and then standing up. And then back down by reversing that movement. Good. And back down. And then lower. Perfect. Any questions with that exercise?
Yeah, that's me again. Same 60-year-old here. So my right knee is so destroyed from an old ACL that's gone. There's no meniscus left. There's nothing. And I'm up for probably knee replacement. In the meantime, looking at what I've never done that actual move before, but I'm looking at the flexion that's needed in that knee, that right knee. And I don't think I could do it with no weight at all. And I'm wondering if there's a modification that would somehow allow me to do it. I have no spring in that right knee. I'm having a hard time doing much of anything with it. Just a thought.
I would say
We'll get surgery, right?
yeah, I would say definitely does require, you're right, like a lot of knee flexion. So what I would suggest would be you can easily just break it up into sections. So maybe just avoiding that section with that knee flexion. So you're still getting that shoulder stability. You're still getting your hips working. So what I mean would be, and I assume kind of the part that's troublesome is probably the initial part. Is that
It's getting up from there to the next stage is where I think my knee will not quite allow me to do it actually.
So I would say what would be probably easiest if you wanted to do at least some of that exercise would be to just be starting from that half kneel position. So yeah, you're missing out maybe a little bit on the core stuff where you're doing that sit up, but you are still getting core work because you're just by having one only one side that has the
That's okay. I kind of see what you're doing.
just by having that one arm up, you're still getting your core stability. And what you can do is just kind of do that half of the movement. So where you're coming up into that standing position, and then you're coming back into there. And then you could also just work on doing that bottom section where you have your knee maybe less flexed, and then you're almost just working on pushing up and then back down. So you could, I would say if you wanted to do that exercise, that would be the way to kind of break it up into two parts and just avoid that knee flexion. It's pretty hard to do the whole exercise without putting your knee into that position, I would say. I'm not sure if maybe Fraser has a workaround, but
I'd approach it very similar to what Shota's doing of breaking it down and skipping the bit that's gonna force the flexion on your knee. I really like the Turkish get up for shoulders because it's applying load straight on, above, and to the side. So to supplement what Shota's added, I'd add, I just call it a windmill. I'm sure it's got 14 other descriptions to it, but we'll just grab the dumbbell here. So in a standing position, I've got the kettlebell right above my shoulder, and I'm just trying to balance and stack it right above the ball and socket on my shoulder. And then I'm just trying to tip to the side and touch down here, and then come back up. And it's really focusing on my shoulder stability. I have really tight hamstrings, and what I really like about this too is it's forcing my hamstrings to stretch under load as well to help with that mobility and flexibility. So I'm just coming through here, but being really mindful of trying to balance my arm as if it's a stick, just balancing through there, and that would get that horizontal plane load that we're kind of getting at the Turkish get up and through that space of where we're here. That's that side phase as I'm kicking through. And we can kind of get that with the video here.
Right. Okay. Thank
The
you.
key thing with that video though is like all these exercises, we're not really bending through our spine. It's all in the hips. And we're trying to use that hip sockets. It's a ball and swivel to get that movement, not so much the spine.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. I'll give that a go.
One question we did have in the chat, guys, is for the reps on the Turkish get up, would that be the same as what you'd be doing with your squats and your step ups as well?
I think it can be addressed, really depends on your goal or your function you're trying to do for all of these. So say for skiing or snowboarding, it's more of a lower leg dominant sport that I may be working more on my power or strength components through there. But then for my shoulders, where I just don't want to dislocate my shoulder in deep powder or slips and falls. And it is working your core, and just a great way to mix this up. In that context, I'd probably go a little more strength to the endurance component. But like I was saying before, for my own ways to advance my own lifestyle right now, I'm 46 and quite stiff and hunch at a computer, that I'm using my squats with high repetitions for more mobility of my upper back that's turning into Montgomery Burns and stiff ankles because of walking around in ski boots. So really depends on your goals and objectives. You don't necessarily have to have a generic reps and sets across the board of what you're doing for your exercises. But saying that too, it's commonly recommended when you're doing these complex compound movements, do them once you're warmed up where you're fresh and there's a lot of muscles moving to coordinate things. Then if in your workout, say it's like a very simple bicep curl, you may want to do that near the end where it's not as complex or compound a movement as far as how I'd set up a program myself. I typically like to work with lots of core muscles or big muscle groups first, and then finish off with, say, forearms or something that's easier to work on and such. Got one more exercise, and then I think we should talk about what Sue talked about of periodization through the season, when I should be doing this and when should I spend my resources elsewhere. Okay.
So the last exercise we're going to be doing is called the kettlebell swing. So this exercise is kind of a simple exercise to get into more power and explosiveness training. So what we're going to be working on here is, again, power is basically how much force you can develop and how fast. So the goal is to try and develop that force as fast as we can while maintaining good technique. So what Fraser's going to do is he's going to, I would say, get into a bit of a, so you're going to have your kettlebell in both hands, get into a bit of a kind of squat position here. And this exercise, again, is more than hips doing the work. It's not the back. So as you come up, just making sure that, again, your core is staying engaged and things are staying neutral in the back. But yeah, so Fraser's going to come into that squat position. He's going to use his hip muscles and butt muscles to drive his hips forward. And at the same time, he's going to let that kettlebell come forward into a bit of a swing. So pushing up like so, and really thinking about, you're driving those hips forward to bring that kettlebell up. So it's not really a shoulder exercise. You're really just using kind of the momentum that you generate with your hips to produce that motion that's going to bring the kettlebell forward. A common mistake I see with this exercise is people trying to use their low back to bring the weight up. So you see kind of that, it looks good all the way up until the end, and then they kind of overarch using their back muscles, and people will often start feeling it in the back muscles. So I would say that's a good note. If you're feeling it in your back, it probably means that you kind of lost that like abdominal engagement, and you're trying to use your back to swing the weight forward rather than the hips. So think about you're like really trying to squeeze your butt as fast as you can to bring that weight forward. Any questions with that one?
No questions, gentlemen.
Okay. How are we doing for time, Grant?
You're doing great. You got half an hour.
Perfect. Well, let's address what Sue had brought up, which is a really good point of the bigger picture of when are we going to do this all. And then if there's any other exercises or discussion points people would like to bring up, we can totally cover those. So Sue had mentioned, if I remember correctly, like, just got an avalanche course. It's really busy right now. Is this the best time for me to be doing these exercises? And this, I think of like a competitive athlete who's trying to peak for the Olympics. There's various times in planning to do that. And I think given that winter is a crazy busy time for a lot of you with very long hours of sometimes waking up at 4 to begin forecasting and such, it is good to have sort of more of a annual plan of what I'm going to be doing and how much time I can allocate to those things. So right now in the heat of things, again, I'd like to thank anyone who's still awake and on this call with us, that I would sort of distill down my strength and conditioning program to basically trying to hit as many muscles as I can with as few exercises as possible. So have more of a real compressed program that's maybe not really advancing too hard my progressions, but it's definitely maintaining what I've got going. Or I just think of like if I'm spending a whole winter in ski boots, there's other things being deficient in what I'm doing. And that may be my cardio, because I'm an amazing skier. Might be ankle mobility because I'm in stiff boots all day long. Or it might be, yeah, I'm doing a lot of driving and a lot of desk time, and I need to break out of that and have more mobility exercises, which could be something like yoga that we're not really more focused on the heavy gym stuff today, but that's definitely things that can be done. Or if you don't have a gym, say you're on site, using unstable items like balls, wobble boards, or TRX suspension systems are very good, where it requires a lot of stability, a lot of recruitment of a lot of different muscles, and you don't need a lot of extra weight to be bringing around. You can basically use your body weight or even partial body weight can make those things quite challenging for it. After about 4 weeks, our body accommodates to whatever stimulus we're adding to it. So you can kind of come up with a program, do that, but after 4 weeks, your body gets used to it and you kind of notice you're not stiff and sore waking up. It's time to change your program. And I always think of TID as the acronym, but it stands for time, intensity, or duration. So you can either increase your reps, increase your weight, or change the type of exercise that you're doing. It may still be working, say, your quads, for example, but you've switched from the squat to, say, a back squat to a front squat, or a split squat, something that's also using those muscles, but differently. And that'll continue with those adaptations again for another 4 weeks. So right now I'd be quite concentrated, just trying to get as much bang for my buck with some compound movements like we're demonstrating today. But then if you have an off season, take a few weeks off and just do whatever you want for both mental, physical, and even just neurological recruitment. And you want to kind of come back to training kind of hungry and eager and motivated, which is really blending into that neural recruitment as well for these. And then maybe this is the time when you've got more time to start working on endurance reps or breaking down complex movements such as the squat to improve your hip stability or ankle mobility with more simple movements or stretches and mobility. So then in your peak season or leading up to winter, getting more to those complicated compound movements and building on those. So for Sue, who's got a very sore knee, hip strength and stability is critical for knees. As long as knees bend forward and back, they're usually pretty good. But as soon as they start going side to side, which is a key deficit you really want to watch, as Shota was talking about with these leg movements, it's all in the hips. And it's really about strengthening the hip rotators, such as doing clamshells, pushing out with your legs, really improves that stability in the hip and your core, that all of a sudden you can generate more force through your legs and improve your leg exercise squat. So sometimes, especially in injury, we're working around what we can't work at quite yet to build up the support structures for it. Any questions on that? Beyond just being busy, how do you factor in the workload of physical work ski touring? Yeah, so by workload, I mean, that could also be, I think a lot of more energy systems where I've just depleted a lot of calories ski touring and shivering and waiting for clients to keep up with me, as an example. So that kind of comes back to definitely maintaining that you're hydrated throughout the day and not just drinking those 2 liters of water you trucked around in your backpack all day in the car, and getting a sufficient caloric intake nicely distributed throughout the day. But it might be that physical work was like physically exhausting or mentally exhausting. And then what is the best use of my time at that point? It may be just a light spin bike to work on recovery. It might be stretching and mobility, which could be some of these light weight drills, like these actually like the Turkish get up and the squat could be great as a mobility thing to do. And then getting to bed early is my regimented workout for that. And it's good to have these long range plans for what I want to do, like month to month, even within a year, but being accommodating to how you're feeling and checking in, which literally comes to that thumbs up, thumbs down, or how are we doing in the middle, to check in with ourselves. It's great to have goals, but we do have to change them to our situation. Much like doing a run check at the start of the day, we don't change the plan once we check in with that and go with it. So just checking in before we start. It's a really good system to do in life as well as training. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm going to open up the chat here so I can see. Oh, sorry, I didn't see the last bit of that. Sorry, I just opened the chat here. So, Dan Rowe, what does that guy know? A gym routine and proper rest. Probably overtraining if you're training a lot, hitting the gym 3 times a week. Some can do it, some can't. My brother-in-law is Simon Whitfield. He went to the Olympics for triathlon. He heals and recovers crazy fast. And he can train hard the next day and the next day, to the point that other people on the team could not keep up to that load capacity and they were getting injured. So some people's gift as far as athleticism is they just sleep really well and recover well so they can hit hard again. So you do have to check in with yourself and know your own abilities, and not every physiological system within your body, like your muscles, your nerves, your bones, recover at the same rate. And a lot of times you learn from good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from poor judgment. A bit of trial and error, but hopefully what we're providing right now is some of the statistical likelihood of how things go for your body based on science and research and large test groups. That we're just giving you a higher starting point to work with these things, but always listen to your body.
I think, yeah, to also cover the last point there, like just the touring and yeah, like trying to go to the gym 3 days a week. And I think, yeah, what Fraser talked about with the annual kind of plan is a good kind of indicator, and it's almost like periodization where, yeah, maybe the winter, it's like, you're super busy, you're working, you're ski touring, maybe you don't have time to go to the gym 3 days a week, but hopefully that your annual plan includes that. Maybe in the summer, if some of you have more time, or yeah, maybe you just are able to kind of have your activities be a bit less taxing, then you can kind of focus on maybe building up that strength. So kind of that curve we were talking about at the start. So maybe that curve is kind of this high, and then to actually maintain muscle and strength, you don't actually need a whole bunch of input. You definitely still need some stimulus, but so maybe the winter is more just kind of focusing on taking a couple of those compound movements and doing them, maybe 2 times a week, or some weeks you only get once a week. But usually that is sufficient enough to kind of keep it at least kind of where it is. You might be not making gains, but that's where I think that annual plan really comes into factor. So it's not just like you have to train 3 times a week always. I think it's just really focusing on like, when can I work on building up this threshold, and then when do I maybe have to just switch gears and focus on just maintaining what I have.
Common in
Awesome,
sports.
thanks guys.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks, Dan. Common in sports, like they'll definitely have a time where they're trying to peak, such as the Olympics. And if they can, they'll keep that peak and try to string a few events with it. But sometimes you'll see athletes actually not showing up for a various event because they are working on training, getting that overtraining actually coming down, or they're just getting more recovery to go again. So timing is everything, and definitely through such as a winter as this, just trying to maintain what you've got, I think is a great goal. And then if you have the opportunity of an off season or a downtime, maybe a lot of cognitive office work, but physically you're not out in the field as much. That'd be a time you can build on things. But yes, stress definitely plays into our health many ways. And part of that too is like, yeah, are we getting sick? Are we getting colds? Pushing through that isn't going to make gains. And it's really about the quality and timing. Quantity really doesn't have much to do with it. A lot of times when we are working with high-end athletes, we're talking about overtraining and junk mileage and really trying to cut down how much volume they're doing to have really crisp quality and showing up thinking like neurologically as well, so they can have like the best sets of 3 sets of 7 that they can execute there with form and explosiveness if we're talking about power. Are there any exercises that people do at the gym or are curious about? And can't tell you what's right, but we can tell you what you think about it. Tim asks, is it typically better to focus on fewer reps and more different exercises, or more reps and fewer exercises? I'm thinking about the best time management. If I'm picking, how do I just thinking how do I think up programs? And part of that is definitely looking at the goal and what that person wants to get to as far as a sport or a function. And then looking at their deficit. And if you're really good at an exercise, you should probably go do another type of exercise. And really just work on those lowest common denominators you've got to try to build those up. So I probably, if I'm new to that goal, that sport, that line of work, I'd probably pick fewer exercises and more reps to get, as Shota was saying with the deadlift, like very robotic in my movements and executing those very well. So it's very rote, that under heavy load or out in the field when I'm distracted, when there's danger, where there's stress, my body just executes those movements. Deadlift is notorious, as perfectly as I can. And then if my goal or occupation or function has very complex movements, classically I think of team sports, so there's a lot of action on the field and it's not a very open environment, or you're out in the field and yeah, one day you're mechanized, the other day you're bushwhacking in the Rockies or digging pits. You're going to want to have less reps, more exercises, and more exercises for that motor control, that ability to adapt to different things that come your way. So there's benefits to both, but I think if I'm just starting out, I would just practice high repetition. So commonly when we prescribe, or at least I prescribe an exercise program to someone and they're not familiar with gym-based and movements, I have them doing 3 sets of 15 with low weight. And it may be so low, like they're not at that last 2 reps are hard, but they're just working on the movements, the motor control. So when they're tired and distracted, they can execute those movements perfectly. And then I'll start working on higher load and more diversity of movements to inquire, so that they can just adapt to situations a lot quicker. There's less big gaps in their movement patterns they need to adapt to. Sue, how do you feel about the leg extension machine? I have trouble doing deep squats. Ooh, this is a really good question. So I use the extension machine that really target my quad and VMO. VMO is the inner quad or vastus medialis obliquus. The muscle's about as big as the length of that name, so we just call it VMO, and I'm having trouble spelling. Leg extension machine where the bolster, the round thing, is against your shin kicking out. Personally, I advise against that. There just have been studies looking at that, and it causes a lot of shear force through the knee, specifically causing strain on an ACL. So if someone's recovering from surgery of an ACL, do not recommend, we call an open chain exercise or that kicking out. However, if it's a leg press and my foot's pushing into a platform, there's far more compression through the knee. We call those closed chain exercises. Same thing goes for shoulders and arms. That doesn't cause that shear force through the knee. So it's a lot safer. The other argument for that is that closed chain. We do that a lot in day-to-day activities. The kicking out motion under that load, other than like say kicking a soccer ball or chunks of snow debris, we don't, that I'm aware of, do that a lot functionally. So that's one exercise I actually I'm quite leery for people to do, just for that strain on the knee or the shear force happening. That is my opinion. Shota, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it is very dependent on your knee injury and history of the knee. Like personally, I think there is a time and a place for every exercise, and it really depends on the history of the knee. So yeah, in Fraser's case, yeah, maybe if you have had an ACL injury and yeah, you've recovered from it or recovering from it. Well, if you're recovering from it, I definitely would not recommend that exercise. But kind of like later on, if it's still, yeah, kind of giving you grief, then I agree with Fraser. I would say sticking with the closed chain exercises is probably a better, better way to go about it. In generally, like as Fraser was mentioning, closed chain is definitely more functional for the most part. But I do, occasionally, give people that leg extension machine. So I see like sometimes in runners that have there's tendinitis in the knee, where we really specifically want to load this muscle and only this muscle to create change and create stronger tendons. Then sometimes I will say, that is an okay machine to utilize. So I would say it is very dependent on the history of the knee. There's definitely a time and a place to use that exercise. But in general, I would say if you're wondering, should I do leg press? So like that leg press machine where there's a plate and then you're pushing up and then down, or should I do this exercise? I would probably recommend people just do the leg press because you're targeting more muscles. And you're still strengthening that quad muscle. So if you're having trouble doing deep squats, maybe working on like a leg press machine would be something that would be like an alternative.
Okay, Shota. So I do the leg press machine as well, but again, I have a hard time getting deep. Am I getting value out of less deep squats? And what about with a hack squat?
Yeah, I think, you're still getting value out of the squats. And again, that's where you can utilize the kind of the tempo or speed of movement to increase challenge. So if you feel like you're only getting to, like a 70-degree bend or something like that, not getting all the way down to 90, maybe what you could do would be add a little hold at the bottom so that you are challenging those muscles. So I think like you can totally get a good workout and good benefit from not going super deep. It doesn't have to be super deep to get value out of it. And the hack squat machine I think is great. I would say that is a closed chain exercise because your feet are planted on the surface. And it is a great workaround for some people too that maybe can't get super deep with the squats. So hack squat is great.
I think you're just getting to the point, am I getting value out of a less deep squat? To be yes, for sure. Any movement is of value. Sometimes we'll do, they call it isometric movement. So the muscle's not changing length, but it's under tension. That's totally fine to happen. And if that's as far as your knee moves, that's your functional range. So you don't need to go much deeper. Sometimes too, say for skiing, we'll work in even above 90 degrees in that squat area. Because you're probably not getting that deep if you're power skiing correctly. However, if we're working with like a short track speed skater or their sport requires a much deeper bend and posture and position, as we get closer to say their race season, we're trying to emulate closer and closer to that functional movement that they do in the sport or the occupation in this context. Yeah, if you're, sorry, Sue mentions my knee can go deeper, but it's associated with a great deal of pain. Definitely I'd stay out of the pain range for sure. Maybe harm there happening as well. From my own experience of trying to push through pain with injuries such as tendonitis, I started to associate the sport or the activity with the pain, and it just started to not be fun. And it was this, I didn't quite notice it initially because I could push through it and my form wasn't falling apart, but just slowly that thing, cross country skiing at the time was not as fun. It wasn't until I revisited it years later and my shoulder felt great that I was able to cue in that just because I was associating with pain that I stopped racing. It's still super fun unless it's a POW day. Thanks for the info. You're welcome. Okay, the real question is, can I forgo knee replacement surgery with the right gym workout? It depends, and we'll talk a bigger component here is arthritis is for the knee and the hip can be reduced or mitigated if we're doing load of those joints through a broad range of motion. And what they found prior to westernization of Asian cultures is hip arthritis was almost unheard of, and now they're right up to the American standard. And the reason they feel, these are longitudinal and cross-sectional studies, is as they became more sedentary and using more westernized office chairs and more computer work, they stopped using their hips through a full range of motion, such as a deep squat, bum to ankle, or ceremoniously eating on the floor, and wasn't moving that hip joint through a big range of motion and not experiencing that load. And cartilage doesn't have a great blood supply to it. It gets a lot of its nutrients by the fluid around it. So if we're loading and squishing the cartilage and pushing the nutrients out and then taking that load off and letting it suck in, it's extremely healthy for the joints. The other thing with strength and conditioning, especially for knees, is the joke around here is I don't even treat knees anymore. I just fix hips and ankles, and that thing in the middle has to toe the line. Like, as long as knees can bend forward and back and there's no rotational or side to side motions, there's very little, in my experience, overuse or traumatic injuries such as tearing your ACL or getting patellar tendonitis, runner's knees, jumper's knee, as long as things go straight up and down. So if we can keep things straight with applying a great foundation to help keep that knee moving, bending straight forward and back, and then also loading that cartilage through a great variety of movement. That's a very healthy thing. I just think of people who do a lot of skiing and powder and they're just wiggling down the hill, their knees bending probably between 120 and 140 degrees, and that's just a 20-degree range of motion. That's it. And then usually they're just awesome at biking because they got huge quads. So in the summer they do lots of cycling, which is a similar range. Their hip has never moved out to the side. They haven't fallen for 5 years skiing. They need to tomahawk down the mountain a little more, or do yoga or climbing, or a gym program that moves their hip and loads their hip in a much deeper range and a much broader range, say out to the side and knees to chest, such as the step up that we are working on today. Those are healthy things for cartilage. So definitely building up strength can reduce injury, traumatic injury that could lead to a knee replacement of arthritis down the road. When you tear your ACL, they know you're going to get arthritis down the road. They're not sure if it's due to the mechanical trauma or the chemical trauma happening there, but there's lots of research just tracking people with or without surgery, and arthritis always shows up on that knee. Now, is it terrible? Will they need a knee replacement or just achy? Really depends on the degree of that trauma. So definitely use it or lose it is the saying for healthy joints and avoiding knee injuries and knee replacements. But if the knee is already looking a lot like a piece of cauliflower with big calcified lobes on it, and the two bones on an x-ray are pretty much abutting one another, meaning that there's not much cartilage left in between them, which you can't see on x-ray, but you'd see the two bones floating. Then if that's matching someone who's having pain, They just call it clinical correlation, is what the person's telling the physician, matching what they're seeing on x-ray. They'd say, there's arthritis, it's quite significant. We may have to talk about knee replacement, but they always try to go with the most conservative approach first, which is strength and conditioning, seeing what improvements we can have there and quality of life before exploring through, say, such thing as a knee replacement. So strength and conditioning is great through every course of that. And after knee replacement, you're probably going to be doing a gym program as well. It will help either avoiding knee replacement or making it a much smooth and quick transition from an operating room table to recovery, to getting back on your skis and skiing thousands of vertical feet with a knee replacement or whatever passion you have. Any other questions? We do see a lot of ACLs in snow industries. Skiing, snowboarding, and soccer are the 3 S words in Banff that they perk up because those are sort of the high risk injuries, and definitely working on strength and kinesthetic awareness and being explosive and really dialing this alignment. So if you're tired, fatigued, distracted, or just didn't see it coming, your body can react and be more resilient for it. If you need a surgery, you already have that physical literacy to execute the rehabilitation program, which initially it's just waiting for things to knit up. Then after that, it's strength and conditioning and getting things to fire and wire correctly to avoid positions that can injure an ACL, which is that knee collapsing in. So when we're doing our squats or deadlifts, we're always trying to push out to maintain that alignment. It's just great form along that line of recovery with ACLs.
Excellent. Yeah, some good questions there for you too. Thank you very much, Fraser and Shota, for your time tonight. That in-depth information that you've given us and telling us about, the foundational principles that we should all be trying to keep in touch with. And, lots of times feels like a pretty heavy, energetic, exercise-filled day, and we still need to make room for time at the gym and time for ourselves and to keep pushing through that as well. Add that into our systems and, like you say, your yearly check-in.
Yeah, but please be compassionate with yourself. If it's a really big, heavy week, it's a real big, heavy week. Don't go to the gym and further stress your nervous system. But if it's your way to associate from what's happening, your happy place or a social place, that might be the thing you need. But the person beside you that had that exact same day, that may not be their thing. So these are some recommendations and hopefully some stepping stones and pillars, but your brain's wired to your body really, really well. And that's how the human race has survived as far as it has. So definitely listen to warning signs and progress and see how it goes.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time tonight. And I'd like to thank everyone else for joining us tonight and taking the time out of their evening to join the CPD series. And hope everyone has a safe winter moving forward. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, and have a great evening, and
Thank you.
get some rest, please.
Good night, everybody.